The battle for Tarnov was nearly lost. Red icons, enemy units, swarmed across the tactical grid, tightening their grip around the last human stronghold. The outer defense lines had collapsed hours ago. Now, the few remaining resistance forces were trapped in the city's heart, cornered like rats in a burning maze. Static-laced transmissions crackled through the speakers, frantic voices calling for reinforcements that would never come. A lesser man might have despaired. Wayne merely exhaled through his nose, his steel-gray eyes narrowing in quiet contemplation. The weight of command was familiar. He had carried it across countless battlefields, through victories hard-won and losses bitterly endured. He knew the look of a war at its breaking point. Yet, he also knew the value of patience. Behind him, Derek Creed slammed his fist against the console, his face set in a scowl. They're overrunning Sector 4. If we don't pull our men back now, they'll be slaughtered. Wayne turned his head slightly. Derek was younger, fiery, his desperation a reflection of the soldiers dying under his command. A good officer, but one still learning the cruelty of war. Slaughtered, Wayne echoed, his voice even. No, they're exactly where they need to be. Derek hesitated, confusion flickering in his eyes. Sir, with respect, we're out of time. Their fleet has us pinned, and the Sovereign's orbital cannons will finish the job before sunrise. Wayne allowed the ghost of a smile to touch his lips. Not if they think they've already won. A new voice cut in from across the room. You're still banking on them underestimating us? Andrew Trent, their cyber warfare specialist, leaned against the control panel, arms folded. His sharp features were illuminated by the glow of cascading data streams. We've lost too much ground for them to second-guess the outcome. Exactly, Wayne murmured, and that's why we still have an advantage. Another tremor rattled through the bunker as distant artillery fire shook the earth. The Empire's legionnaires were pressing deeper into the city. The radio crackled to life again. Lance Rourke's voice came through, ragged with exertion. We're holding the line at the Ashen District, but not for much longer. They're bringing in Titan mechs. Derek turned toward Wayne. Sir, we need to reinforce them. Wayne shook his head. No, we need to make them overcommit. A silence stretched across the room. Derek's jaw tightened. You want us to let them push deeper? Wayne nodded, stepping closer to the holographic display. His fingers danced over the controls, shifting the battlefield projection to reveal hidden corridors beneath the city. The deeper they come, the more overconfident they become. They think they're marching toward a surrender, a final execution. That arrogance will be their downfall. Andrew let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. You really think they'll fall for it? Wayne's smile was razor-thin. They already have. A new, harsher voice cut through the room. The Empire's broadcast, blaring across all frequencies. A deep, guttural tone, dripping with certainty. This is General Soren of the Imperial Dominion. Your resistance has been noted and deemed irrelevant. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Derek exhaled through his nose, anger flickering in his gaze. Arrogant bastard. Wayne tilted his head, listening. He heard something beneath the words, an assumption, an unshakable belief in human defeat. That was the weakness. That was the opening. He pressed a button on the console, transmitting his response across all channels. This is General Wayne Harlan of the Tarnov Resistance, he said, voice calm, measured. To the Galactic Empire, I have only one thing to say. A beat of silence. You forgot rule number 1. Across the battlefield, the tide began to shift. The Empire's forces continued their relentless advance, but something was wrong. Their soldiers, so sure of victory, began encountering unexpected resistance. Communications went dark in key sectors. Weapons failed at crucial moments. The air crackled with electromagnetic pulses, disabling their drones mid-flight. And in the chaos, the human forces began to move with eerie precision. Lance's voice came through once more, this time tinged with grim amusement. They're getting sloppy, confused. Just like you said, Wayne allowed himself a slow breath. The game was beginning. Derek's expression shifted from doubt to realization. You've been feeding them false data this whole time. Wayne inclined his head. Since before they set foot on this planet, every move they've made, every decision, guided by the intelligence we wanted them to see. Andrew let out a low whistle. Damn, that's cold. Wayne ignored the comment, his attention fixed on the battlefield map. Now we give them the final push. On the horizon, distant explosions rippled through the night as pre-planted charges ignited, cutting off key enemy supply routes. The Empire's legionnaires, once an unshakable force, found themselves suddenly isolated, trapped within the very city they sought to conquer. Derek exhaled, shaking his head. I can't believe this might actually work. It will, Wayne said simply, because the Empire only understands brute force. They never consider the cost of arrogance. Another tremor shook the command center as the Sovereign's cannons fired, but this time, the resistance was ready. Anti-orbital weapons, long hidden beneath the planet's surface, activated in response, sending streaks of energy slamming into the Empire's flagship. The once invulnerable warship shuddered under the impact. For the first time, the Galactic Empire was no longer in control. Wayne straightened, his voice calm but firm. Begin the counteroffensive. Across the ruined city, human forces emerged from the shadows, striking with ruthless efficiency. What had once seemed like the final act of their downfall was now something far deadlier, a carefully orchestrated reversal. In the skies above, the Sovereign hesitated. For the first time in its history, it did not know whether to advance or retreat. And in that moment of doubt, Wayne Harlan knew they had won the first battle. The air inside the war room was thick with the scent of metal and sweat, the low hum of machines filling the silence as the men inside studied the battlefield holomap. Outside, the Empire continued its advance, oblivious to the noose tightening around its throat. Wayne Harlan stood at the head of the room, his hands folded behind his back, watching the holographic projection of Tarnov flicker before him. The city's districts pulsed with red markers, the enemy's movements mapped in real time. If the Empire's calculations were correct, they believed victory was imminent. They had the numbers, the firepower, the sheer force to grind the resistance into dust. They believed what he wanted them to believe. Derek Creed leaned forward, his brows furrowed. I still don't understand how you're so certain they'll take the bait. The Empire isn't stupid. They know we've got tricks up our sleeve. Wayne's gaze remained fixed on the map. They think we're fighting a war of desperation. Every move we've made so far has reinforced that belief. They expect us to crumble because they've given us no other option. Andrew Trent exhaled sharply, arms crossed. And you're making sure they don't realize they're the ones with no options. Wayne nodded. Precisely. The room fell into silence, save for the soft beeping of incoming data streams. On the battlefield, the Empire's forces continued their march, their lines tightening as they prepared for what they assumed would be the final crushing blow. Their confidence was a liability Wayne had learned to exploit long ago. He tapped the command into the console, and new blue markers appeared on the map. Hidden resistance forces embedded within the city's ruins, waiting for the order to strike. Every street they had abandoned had been left with a purpose. Every corridor they had seemingly lost was nothing more than another step in the Empire's spiral toward defeat. Lance Rourke's voice crackled through the comms. My team's in position. The minute they pushed past the Ashen District, we cut them off. Wayne's expression didn't change. Hold fire until the last possible moment. Derek shifted beside him, his unease still evident. This is one hell of a gamble. Wayne turned his head slightly, his gaze unreadable. War is a gamble. The key is making sure the other side never realizes when the dice are loaded. Derek let out a breath, shaking his head. And rule number 1? Wayne's lips barely curled. Never fight on their terms. Outside, the Empire's war machine continued its relentless push forward. Their armored units rolled through abandoned streets, their soldiers moving in disciplined formations, oblivious to the subtle shifts happening beneath their feet. Power grids they believed had been destroyed flickered back to life in controlled bursts. Communications they relied on to coordinate their advance were subtly rerouted, manipulated to feed them misinformation. Andrew Trent had spent weeks embedding himself within the Empire's encrypted networks, feeding them just enough truth to keep them confident, while weaving in carefully placed distortions. What the Empire saw on their screens wasn't the reality of the battlefield, but a carefully constructed illusion designed to lead them further into the trap. They just lost their supply drop at Grid 17, Andrew announced, scanning the data before him. They'll assume it was bad intel, not sabotage. That'll delay their advance by another hour. Good, Wayne murmured. Every second we tightens the rope, a new transmission crackled through the speakers, its tone rich with arrogance. Resistance forces, this is General Soren of the Imperial Dominion. Your war is over. Lay down your arms and accept your fate. Derek scoffed. Right, because that worked so well for the last planets they crushed. Wayne watched the holographic map, his face unreadable. Let them believe they've won. They won't question their own victory until it's too late. On the battlefield, the trap continued to take shape. The Empire's legionnaires advanced in perfect formation, their commanders barking orders as they pushed deeper into the ruins. They were conditioned for absolute obedience, trained to crush opposition with overwhelming force. But Wayne had studied them. He knew their weakness wasn't their lack of power. It was their inability to comprehend a war fought on anything other than brute strength. That was why they would fail. As their front lines reached the Ashen District, Lance Rourke's voice cut through the comms. They're in the kill box. Wayne exhaled, eyes still on the map. Begin. The first explosion came from beneath their feet. The Legionnaires barely had time to react before the street collapsed beneath them, swallowing entire squads into the underground ruins below. A second blast sent debris raining down from the crumbling structures above, sealing their fate. Chaos erupted in their ranks. From the shadows, resistance fighters emerged, striking with surgical precision. Every shot counted. Every movement was calculated. The Empire's forces, so used to being the hunters, found themselves hunted. In the war room, Wayne watched it unfold in real time. He didn't need to give orders. The battle was already playing out as planned. Andrew let out a low whistle. They're scrambling. Comms are breaking down. You'd think they'd have learned not to underestimate us by now. They don't learn, Wayne said simply. That's why we win. Derek exhaled, tension still visible in his stance. We've got them disoriented. But they're not broken yet. Wayne nodded. They will be. A new alert flashed across the map. The Sovereign was repositioning, preparing to fire its orbital cannons. The Empire, realizing the battlefield had turned against them, was reverting to brute force. Wayne's expression didn't waver. Andrew, are we ready? Andrew grinned, fingers flying across the console. Been ready? With a single keystroke, the Resistance's final deception was set into motion. The Empire had never considered the possibility that their own warship could be turned against them. They had assumed, as always, that their technology was impervious, their security unbreakable. They had been wrong. Wayne watched as the Sovereign systems began to flicker, subtle at first, then cascading into a full-scale blackout. Weapons systems went offline. Targeting systems failed. Command functions collapsed into disarray. For the first time in the war, the Empire's flagship was blind. Andrew leaned back, satisfied, and just like that, the big bad wolf lost its teeth. Derek let out a breath, his gaze flicking to Wayne. Now what? Wayne finally turned from the map, meeting his lieutenant's stare. Now we take the fight to them. The war was far from over, but for the first time since it began, the Empire was no longer in control. The Sovereign's orbital cannons should have fired by now, but instead of death raining down from the sky, The vast warship hung in space, eerily silent, its once impenetrable systems compromised. The Empire's forces below had yet to realize their most powerful asset was no longer theirs to command. Wayne Harlan watched the battlefield from the command center, his expression unreadable. The first stage had played out exactly as planned. Now came the second, the counterattack. Derek Creed paced beside him, restless energy rolling off him in waves. The Sovereign's down. Their legionnaires are cut off. If we hit now, we break them. Wayne exhaled, his gaze still locked on the battlefield display. The red markers of the enemy forces had begun to flicker, shifting into disorganized chaos. The trap had sprung, but the Empire was a wounded beast, dangerous, desperate. A mistimed strike could still cost them everything. Not yet, Wayne murmured. Wait for them to fracture. Andrew Trent leaned against the console, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. You're betting on them panicking. I'm counting on it, Wayne corrected. Outside, the reality of their situation was dawning on the Empire's commanders. The forward Legionnaire units, so certain of their unstoppable march, now found themselves isolated, their supply lines cut, their communications jammed. What had been an overwhelming assault had turned into a slow collapse. Panic was infectious. Across the battlefield, resistance fighters struck with ruthless efficiency. Hidden sniper nests picked off squad leaders. Ambush teams tore through weakened flanks. The once imposing enemy forces, genetically enhanced, cybernetically augmented, were suddenly nothing more than men bleeding in the dirt. And above it all, the Sovereign still hung in silence. Lance Rourke's voice crackled through the comms. Wayne, the East Sector's breaking. Their forces are falling back, but not in any coordinated way. It's a damn mess out here. Wayne's fingers drummed once against the console. There, the fracture had begun. Now, he said, push. Derek was already barking orders into his comm, his earlier tension transforming into sharp focus. All units advance. Drive them toward the choke points. Cut off their retreat. Across the ruined city, resistance forces surge forward. They move like predators, striking from the rubble, using the terrain the enemy had once thought abandoned. Every street, every corridor had been pre-planned for this exact moment. The Empire had no ground left to control. The screams of legionnaires filled the comms as their lines collapsed under the sudden, coordinated assault. Officers shouted orders that no one could hear, their own signals jammed by Andrew's continuous cyber interference. For the first time, the Empire was not simply fighting against soldiers. It was fighting against ghosts. Derek turned to Wayne, a fierce glint in his eyes. They're breaking. Wayne barely nodded. His mind was already on the next step. Victory wasn't simply about forcing the enemy to retreat. It was about ensuring they never returned. A sharp alert flashed across the holomap. A red marker still burned strong amid the chaos. The Sovereign was powering up again. Andrew's fingers flew across the console, scanning the data feeds. They're rerouting control systems. Someone on board is overriding our hack. Wayne's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance, but not this quickly. If the Empire regained control of their flagship, the entire battle could shift again. He activated his comm lance. I need your team inside the Sovereign now. Lance's reply came immediately, breathless but determined. Already moving? Wayne turned to Derek. We can't let them stabilize. Keep the pressure on the ground. No matter what happens up there, we make sure they have nothing left down here. Derek nodded once before striding away to relay the orders. Wayne exhaled, his thoughts already reaching beyond the immediate battle. The Empire had underestimated them, but they had also underestimated the Empire. A new voice cut through the comms, low and full of fury. General Harlan. Wayne's expression didn't change, but he recognized the voice instantly. General Soren, the enemy's supreme commander, had finally decided to speak. You are prolonging the inevitable. Soren continued, his voice steady despite the unraveling battlefield. You believe you are winning, but your resistance is nothing more than a delay. Your forces are outnumbered, your resources stretched thin. Even if you succeed here, the Empire will return. We will burn this world to the ground. Wayne's fingers tightened around the console's edge. The Empire's arrogance never ceased to astound him. Even now, as their soldiers fell, as their forces crumbled, they still believed themselves invincible. He pressed the comms button. You forgot rule number 1. Silence. Then a low, humorless chuckle. You think your games can outmatch the might of the Dominion? Wayne allowed himself the faintest of smiles. I think your warship is burning. The Sovereign's power systems flickered again, its engines struggling against the sabotage. The great warship was no longer a symbol of dominance. It was a liability, a sinking colossus too large to escape the gravity of its own downfall. Wayne watched the map as Lance's team breached the ship's outer defenses. The battle was entering its final stage. Soren's voice hardened. You believe you have won a battle of strategy. But war is not strategy, Harland. War is power. And I have more of it than you ever will. A new alert flashed on the holomap. Wayne's stomach tightened. The Sovereign's remaining weapon systems had been rerouted to a single function. They weren't targeting the Resistance. They were targeting the planet itself. Derek's voice cut through the comms. Wayne, they're charging something big. Wayne's mind worked at lightning speed. Soren wasn't trying to win the battle anymore. He was trying to erase it. If he couldn't control Tarnov, he would make sure no one could. The Sovereign's main cannon, designed to crack planetary crusts, was already drawing energy from the ship's failing core. Wayne activated his comm, Lance. You need to disable that cannon now. Lance's voice was strained. We're moving, but they're throwing everything at us. Wayne's jaw tightened. Time was slipping away. He turned to Andrew. If we can't stop the cannon, can we turn it on itself? Andrew blinked. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. Now that's a nasty idea. His fingers flew across the controls. Give me 30 seconds. Wayne turned back to the holomap, watching as the Resistance forces continued to press the Empire's broken ranks. The battle on the ground was nearly won, but none of it would matter if the Sovereign fired. The countdown began. 10 seconds. 9. Wayne inhaled. 8. 7. The Empire still believed in brute force. 6. 5. They still believed that victory was measured in destruction. 4. 3. But war was never about destruction. 2. It was about control. 1. The Sovereign's cannon erupted with light and turned its fury inward. Andrew let out a sharp laugh. Got it. On the battlefield, soldiers from both sides turned their eyes to the sky as the Sovereign, once the mightiest warship in the Dominion's fleet, was consumed in a blinding explosion. Wayne exhaled slowly. The battle for Tarnov was over, and the Empire had lost. The Sovereign's explosion ripped through the sky, a blinding supernova destruction that sent shockwaves cascading through the battlefield. The towering warship, once a symbol of the Empire's absolute power, was now a collapsing inferno, debris streaking toward the planet's surface like falling stars. The silence that followed was deafening. For a single, frozen moment, both sides halted. The Empire's remaining ground forces, so conditioned to the Sovereign's ever-present shadow, stared upward in disbelief. The Resistance fighters, battle-worn and bloodied, barely dared to hope. Then, the comms crackled. Derek Creed's voice came through, ragged with exhilaration. It's gone. The Sovereign is gone. Cheers erupted across the battlefield. The Resistance forces surged forward, pressing the advantage, driving the shattered remnants of the Empire's legionnaires into full retreat. The battle had turned irrevocably. Victory was no longer a distant dream. It was within reach. But Wayne Harlan wasn't celebrating. He watched the retreating enemy forces with cold calculation, his mind already moving beyond the moment. A shattered army was still an army. If the remaining legionnaires regrouped, if Soren still drew breath, the war would not be over. His calm buzzed. Andrew Trent's voice was laced with exhaustion, but still carried a sharp edge. They're running, but not fast enough. They know if they don't hold something, they're finished. Wayne turned toward Derek, who was already scanning the battlefield reports. Where's Soren? Derek's expression darkened. Pulled back with his honor guard. They're rallying near the central district. Looks like they're digging in. Wayne nodded. Of course, Soren would never flee. His pride wouldn't allow it. The general had lost his fleet, lost his warship. But he would rather die on a mountain of corpses than admit defeat. So be it. Wayne activated his calm. Lance, what's your status? The reply came between heavy breaths. Made it out before the Sovereign blew. My team's regrouping. We can hit the central district from the south. Do it, Wayne said. We end this. Derek's jaw tightened. You're going after Soren yourself. Wayne glanced at him, expression unreadable. You have a problem with that. Derek hesitated. Then his lips pressed into a firm line. No, sir. Wayne clapped a hand on his shoulder. Then let's finish what we started. They moved swiftly through the war-torn streets, resistance fighters rallying behind them. The city was a broken skeleton of what it once was, its buildings shattered, its streets littered with the bodies of the fallen. The acrid scent of burning metal and scorched earth filled the air, mixing with the iron tang of blood. The central district loomed ahead, the Empire's last holdout. Soren's remaining forces had fortified their position, barricades of wreckage and overturned vehicles forming makeshift defenses. Legionnaires stood in rigid formations, their weapons trained, their eyes burning with fanatical resolve. They were ready to die, and so they would. Wayne signaled to Lance's strike team, who took position along the southern flank. Snipers nested along the rooftops. Explosives were primed. Every piece moved into place. Then, with a single motion, Wayne raised his hand. The resistance struck. Gunfire erupted. Streaks of plasma tearing through the night. Explosions thundered through the district as hidden charges detonated, sending metal and bodies flying. The resistance poured forward, overwhelming the legionnaires with sheer precision and ferocity. Wayne moved through the chaos like a specter, his rifle firing in precise bursts, dropping enemies with ruthless efficiency. Beside him, Derek fought with relentless aggression, cutting through the enemy lines with cold fury. The legionnaires fought savagely, refusing to yield, but without their fleet, without their warship, they were already dead men. Still, Soren did not emerge. Wayne's patience thinned. He signaled to Lance. Find him. Lance's team pushed through the final barricade, clearing the way into the last remaining structure, a shattered command hall, its once pristine walls now cracked and charred. Inside, the remnants of the Empire's officers lay dead, some by resistance fire, others by their own hands. Cowards who had chosen death over capture. And at the far end of the hall, standing amidst the ruin of his legacy, was Soren. He was alone. Wayne stepped forward, rifle at the ready, but Soren did not reach for his weapon. The general stood tall, his imposing frame silhouetted against the burning skyline. His golden armor, once pristine, was scorched and dented. His face, scarred and weathered, betrayed nothing. So, Soren murmured, this is how it ends. Wayne's grip on his weapon didn't waver. It was over the moment you underestimated us. Soren exhaled, almost amused. No, it was over the moment you forced me to become what I despised. Wayne tilted his head slightly. And what's that? Soren's dark eyes locked onto his. A desperate man. There was no warning. The Empire's general lunged, drawing a hidden blade in a flash of silver. Wayne barely dodged, twisting as the blade sliced past his ribs. He countered with a swift strike, knocking Soren back. The older warrior recovered instantly, his movements sharp, precise. Wayne had faced many enemies, but few moved like Soren. This wasn't just brute strength. This was the deadly skill of a veteran who had survived countless wars. Soren struck again, their blades clashing, sparks flying in the dim light. The fight was brutal, unrelenting. Each strike was calculated, every movement an attempt to end it in a single blow. Then, Wayne saw the opening. Soren overextended just slightly, just enough. Wayne drove his knife forward, plunging it between the Empire's general's ribs. Soren's breath hitched. His blade slipped from his grasp. His body wavered. Wayne held him firm, his voice low. "You forgot rule number 1. Soren's lips parted, a strange expression crossing his face. Something like realization, like acceptance. Then he fell. Silence settled over the hall. Wayne stepped back, his chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. The weight of the moment settled over him, heavy as iron. Derek entered, scanning the scene. He met Wayne's gaze, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "It's over," Derek said. Wayne glanced around at the broken remnants of the Empire's command. Their strongest warriors lay dead. Their flagship was gone. Their forces routed. It was over. Outside, the battlefield had gone eerily quiet. The resistance forces, having witnessed the fall of the last enemy stronghold, stood amidst the ruins, their weapons lowered. Some looked stunned, others simply relieved. And then the cheering began. It started small, then grew, rolling through the city like a wave. Victory. Hard won. Paid for in blood, but victory nonetheless. Wayne stepped out into the night, feeling the first breath of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Derek joined him, glancing at the smoldering remains of the city. What now? Wayne watched as the sun began to rise over the ruins of Tarnov, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. Now, he murmured, we build a future where we don't need rule number 1. Derek exhaled, nodding. The war was over, but the fight for what came next had just begun.